With all the hubbub around the FX5, I think, we can easily just kind of pull back away from that. We should be focusing more on what people are doing with these tools rather than what the tools are capable of themselves. What we should be enriching ourselves is more creativity, and pushing ourselves, beyond the gear and thinking of ways like, hey man, how can I tap into to more of that creative realm? And I think a show like this can be some great inspiration for all of us. I just wanted to talk to you guys about this show. It is a remake of the 1954 novel Lord of the Flies. BBC has done a 4-part miniseries now on Netflix, and I gotta tell you, man, it's pretty badass. I definitely remember watching this movie when I was a kid, and it's gnarly. But now BBC have tackled it and brought it to life. The novel was adapted by the same guy that did Adolescence, but then they got Mark Wolf as the cinematographer on it. He kind of does have more of that Nat Geo kind of documentary wildlife eye to begin with, which is honestly, in my opinion, a great choice for a show like this. If you're into something fresh and new, because I feel like there's so much on TV and film nowadays that just feels very generic and just kind of like, meh, nothing feels artistically fresh, whether you like to admit it or not. There are certain films or shows out there that can be art. And in my opinion, this is one of them.
The look evolves over time. It's not like one day we have this idea, the next day we know exactly this is how it works out. It evolved over a long time.
Look, if you don't know the story of The Lord of the Flies, it's 36 boys, British boys, end up all alone on this remote island by themselves with no parents, no adults around at all. It's just 36 kids stuck on an island with a bunch of wild boars and a couple dead bodies, right? We'll just leave it at that. Their mental condition starts to wane as time goes on. And with that, in this 4-part miniseries shot by Mark Wolf, they really lean into that with the cinematography, with the use of infrared cameras, mixing the DZO lenses, mixing those with like Angénieux zooms and even anamorphics. The cinematography gets gnarly, the music gets gnarly, the whole production design, the value, just everything gets more gnarly as the 4-part series progresses. I think it was done so well in bringing the audience along that kind of almost like we're drifting into madness with the kids. The use of infrared was first introduced with the idea of the limitations of working with 36 children. They're limited to only shooting 5 hours a day, and you can't even do overnights with kids. So the cutoff is 11 p.m. This idea of being caught on this remote island, obviously a lot of stuff gets caught at nighttime. So this is where the use of infrared first came about. It seems like the infrared started out as an answer to a logistical problem, and then later turned into something they could really lean into from an artistic, creative standpoint. They just really lean into it heavier and heavier as the progression of the story continues and as kind of like the madness ensues. It's really cool to see.
The day for night was a whole story in itself, because there's a lot of night scenes of the film, a lot of scenes with children running through the forest. I've lit forests before, but you can only light so much of a forest. You don't really see much depth. So I was thinking, how am I going to light a forest at night? How am I going to light these huge beaches at night? Nope had recently come out and they had some amazing infrared techniques on that, but we didn't have nearly their budget. And all the filming locations were very remote. They're on islands, you could only access by boats. You couldn't drive to them. We weren't allowed to travel at night. The kids could only shoot up till 11 o'clock at night. Just would have been a massive undertaking and pretty inflexible. So then we sort of committed to shooting day for night.
Longtime viewers of this show will know that I am colorblind. I have a red-green hue deficiency. So I wasn't quick to pick up on the progression of this infrared as someone like with normal vision as Marianne. And I think it was around like the 3rd episode, she turns and looks at me and she goes, "Can you see what's happening?" And I was like, well, yeah, the show's wild, man. But she was seeing this progression of the infrared a lot quicker than I was, because the green foliage turns red. I wasn't able to really notice it until it got really deep and hardcore, a lot more saturated, such as something into the final episode. This whole idea came about, as Mark shared in an interview, how film photographers used Aerochrome, a Kodak Aerochrome, an infrared film like in the 60s and 70s to do artwork and album covers for, people like Jimi Hendrix and Bob Dylan.
Mark had shown me pictures by a photographer called Richard Moss, and he'd gone to Africa to shoot child soldiers. The forest was all red, but the skin tones were still, proper skin tones. Initially, I thought it's got to be, done in Photoshop. How can you create such red foliage like that? Found out that he'd shot, like you say, he'd used Kodak Aerochrome, which was actually a film that was developed for the American military, I think. Anything that's green and organic in the frame will turn red. So, for instance, if you had a tank that was painted green in amongst the forest, the tank is obviously inorganic, so it wouldn't show up as red. Only the foliage around it would show up as red. I think there's license in the film to create something, a certain feeling of truthfulness.
They converted a Blackmagic Pocket Cinema camera to infrared, and then they also had a red camera, a red digital cinema camera that they converted to infrared. And then with the help of Kalari, they were able to use this IR chrome filter on top of these cameras that had already been converted to infrared. Like if you picked up the IR chrome filter for $100, and you just threw that on your Sony camera or something, you're not going to get that look. It's specifically made for full spectrum infrared cameras. One thing I want to add is that this film called Walkabout from 1971 was a big reference for this film's cinematography. And you can kind of see that in these screen grabs.
There were some huge 11-page scenes with all the kids, and we began filming those in a kind of more conventional way, and it just wasn't really working. The children hadn't really done much acting, so they wouldn't be able to sort of repeat things. And we just figured out we're better to stand off a little bit, observe what they're doing, let them do their thing, and just shoot them that way. So then we started using Angénieux zooms for that, just so it was kind of less obtrusive, and we could step back and let them have a bit more freedom, I guess.
Digging into this infrared look, I love the mix of DZOFilm Pavo anamorphics, arguably more budget-friendly anamorphics, mixing those with old school anamorphics, such as the Atlas wide-angle anamorphics for very specific close-up, distorted perspectives. They're mixing that, and then they're mixing it with the original OG Angénieux zooms. It's so rad to see the mix of the different styles all in the same span of one episode.
I wanted sort of a claustrophobic kind of feel, and I loved the kind of swirly, out of focus areas that you'd get, particularly if you're shooting with foliage in the background.
Where there's water on the lens. It feels like the camera is immersed with the characters.
Combining that with the amazing musical score that is with this show, and the sound design is really good, like the crunching of the leaves and just very, very intense, along with the cinematography. I just think it's a show that feels very refreshing. It's beyond just the way it looks, though. Like the whole experience, it really is an experience of a show. If you only watch the first episode, you're not going to get the whole taste of it, because again, this is something where the visuals and just the energy of the show progresses over the span of the 4 episodes. In episode 1, they're not really leaning into the infrared that heavy, but by the last episode, it's like almost all infrared. It's an experience from episode 1 to all the way to the final. I think it's one of those things you got to ride it out the whole way to fully, truly experience it. It's just a beautiful way of conveying the emotion of what's literally happening to the characters, having the audience experience that with them. It's been a long time since I felt that way while watching a show. It certainly is another level, another corridor of what we could be capable of in terms of storytelling. It doesn't matter what camera is in your hand. It doesn't matter what people are trying to sell you. What we should be enriching ourselves is more creativity, and pushing ourselves, beyond the gear. And I think a show like this can be some great inspiration for all of us. Check it out. Thanks for the support, guys. We'll see you in the next one.